They say that history often repeats itself. The same processes and events coincide after decades, which gives rise to various theories about the cyclical nature of history. But what happened to the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, is not just similar to one of the major events of the late 20th century, it literally looks like a copy down to the details. Just one day later, on January 4, 1990, exactly 36 years ago, the United States military captured Manuel Noriega, the leader of Panama, who, like Maduro, was accused of ties to drug crime. Noriega was shoved into an American helicopter, photographed for everyone to see, and sent to stand trial in the States. Today, we'll talk about the incredible parallels with Venezuela and the American invasion of Panama. The main parallel from the old invasion is its primary cause. No matter how interesting the details are, which we'll discuss, the main motive for the military invasion was economic. For the sake of appearances, of course, Donald Trump first mentioned drug trafficking, dictatorship, and other things condemned by society, but then he said the following words: "The United States will be heavily involved in Venezuela's oil sector." Venezuela was hardly producing any oil, despite all its potential. Major companies in the United States will go in and spend billions of dollars to rebuild the oil infrastructure. We will carry out a second strike if necessary. Let me remind you that Venezuela holds a leading position in the world in terms of proven reserves. As for Panama, the main economic interest of the United States was and remains the Panama Canal. The idea of creating a waterway between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through the Isthmus of Panama first arose back in 1513. At that moment, Spanish conquistador Vasco Núñez de Balboa climbed the mountain ridge in the isthmus's center and saw the Pacific Ocean for the first time. In his records, he mentioned the possibility of building a canal that could connect the two oceans, but it was only nearly 4 centuries later that this idea was put into practice. The first to begin implementing the project were the French in 1879, but their attempt ended in failure. The reasons were serious engineering mistakes, the mass death of workers from tropical diseases, and a severe lack of funding. In 9 years, less than a third of the planned work was completed, while expenses more than doubled the original estimate. In 1889, long before construction was finished, the funds ran out, and the project had to be terminated. Despite the French failure, the idea of the canal itself was not forgotten. In 1903, the United States joined the project. The United States signed a lease agreement with Colombia, which Panama was then a part of, for a strip of land about 20 kilometers wide for a period of 100 years. The American side planned to use the facilities already built by the French, but the existing legal mechanisms allowed Colombia to nationalize this infrastructure at any time. This option was completely unacceptable to Washington. The only solution for the United States was the separation of Panama from Colombia and the creation of a formally independent state, with which a new, more favorable agreement could be made. At the end of that same year, 1903, the Americans separated Panama from Colombia and declared its independence. Just 2 weeks later, an agreement was signed with the new Panamanian government, the United States received the land for the canal for unlimited use, and the United States Department of Defense began construction. The first ship passed through the canal 10 years later, and the official opening ceremony took place in 1920. Since it was put into operation, the Panama Canal has become a crucial element of global trade, significantly shortening sea routes between the eastern and western coasts of the Americas. The route from New York to San Francisco was reduced from 22,500 kilometers to 9,500. We have already talked about this briefly. The canal has become one of the main transportation arteries of the planet, providing its owners not only with significant income, but also with serious political advantages. In 1977, the leader of the Panamanian Revolution, effectively the head of state, Omar Torrijos, and the President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, signed an agreement according to which the canal was to come under full Panamanian control in 1999. Nevertheless, just a few years later, the United States began insisting on revising the terms of the agreement. The Panamanian authorities refused to make concessions, which led to a deterioration in bilateral relations. At that time, the country was led by Manuel Noriega, a former United States ally and ex-CIA agent. The troublesome agent, Manuel Antonio Noriega, one of Latin America's most controversial figures in the late 20th century. His rise to power, close ties with American intelligence agencies, and simultaneous involvement in international drug trafficking made him both an ally and an enemy of the United States. Manuel entered Peru's military school at a young age, where, according to American sources, he first drew the attention of United States intelligence agencies. As early as the 1960s, Noriega began cooperating with American intelligence, and later became a full-fledged CIA agent. His value to Washington was his information access, control of the Panamanian military, and ability to influence regional politics. After the 1968 coup that brought General Amara Torrijos to power, Noriega quickly rose in Panama's military intelligence, becoming an indispensable United States partner. Noriega gave the Americans intelligence on Central American leftist movements, monitored Cuba, Nicaragua, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in the region, and aided covert United States operations against the Sandinistas and Nicaragua. He received regular CIA payments that, according to sources, totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. After Torrijos died in 1981, Noriega consolidated real power, even without formally being president. By the mid-80s, he was effectively Panama's dictator, controlling the army, intelligence, and key financial flows. During this time, his connections with international drug cartels strengthened. One of Noriega's key partners was Pablo Escobar, the Colombian leader of the world-famous Medellin cartel, and, at that time, the most influential drug lord in the world, about whom we also talked in our video about Colombia, by the way. Under Noriega, Panama became a major transit hub for cocaine coming from Colombia to the United States. Millions were laundered through Panamanian banks, with airfields and ports used to transport drugs. Noriega not only ignored cartel activities but also took part, offering protection, logistics, and financial support. He received large bribes, some of which he used to strengthen his power. He kept working with American intelligence, creating a paradox. Noriega, involved in drug trafficking, was still an official United States partner. This happened because, during the Cold War, Washington prioritized fighting communism in Central America over combating drugs. As long as Noriega helped counter leftist regimes and movements, his criminal activities were seen as an acceptable side effect. Moreover, there is evidence that some of the drug profits were used to finance covert United States operations, including supporting the Contras. The situation began to change in the second half of the 1980s. As the Cold War was coming to an end, Noriega's political value was decreasing, and his behavior was becoming increasingly uncontrollable. He began to show independence and refused to comply with certain demands from Washington. Most notably, in 1987, he banned the United States from using Panama for operations against Nicaragua. At the same time, evidence of his involvement in drug trafficking began to surface in the American press and courts. In 1988, a United States federal court charged Noriega with drug trafficking and money laundering. From that moment on, he completely turned from an ally into an enemy. The Americans were still trying to negotiate with Noriega, offering to drop all charges if he stepped down from his position and helped revise the Panama Canal Agreement. However, based on later events, Noriega declined this generous offer. Later, he also ignored the results of the 1989 elections and suppressed the resulting protests, thus giving another reason for accusations against him. Of course, the world's policeman and defender of democracy could not tolerate such anti-democratic actions. Therefore, the states began actively preparing for an invasion of a country with which they don't even share a border. Invasion. Since losing control over Noriega, the White House began consistently increasing pressure on the Panamanian leadership, hiding behind formally respectable pretexts. Members of the American Congress and other representatives of the United States political establishment claimed that Noriega's actions threatened the neutrality of the Panama Canal, and that the United States had the right, according to treaties, to intervene militarily to protect the canal. United States President George Bush outlined 4 objectives for the invasion. The The first was to protect the lives of United States citizens in Panama. Allegedly, Noriega had endangered the lives of about 35,000 United States citizens living there. The second was to protect democracy and human rights in Panama, a classic American pretext. The third objective was to combat illegal drug trafficking. The fourth was to protect the integrity of the Torrijos-Carter treaties regarding the Panama Canal. Well, to put it mildly, the reasons were quite far-fetched. Several events served as warning signs of the approaching threat. With a one-year gap, the states sent 2 military groups totaling 3,300 to Panama, claiming to protect American citizens. Then, in 1989, there was a military coup in Panama. A group of Panamanian army officers, many of whom had been trained at United States military bases, tried to overthrow Noriega. The coup failed, and Noriega remained in power. Washington at first denied any involvement in the coup, but later admitted that the CIA was at least aware of the coup plans a month after the failed uprising and the obvious involvement of the states. Panama's former president, Rodriguez, stated at a meeting with journalists that the main reason for the country's difficult socio-economic situation was the hostile policy of the United States. He added that Panama intended to strengthen ties with other countries, including the Soviet Union. The day after Rodriguez's statement, the United States announced it would evacuate the families of American military personnel in Panama, and this became an obvious signal that war was near. When you see families being evacuated, know that war is inevitable, recalled an American officer who served in Panama. The military operation began on the night of December 20, 1989, with sabotage actions and massive airstrikes on several Panamanian cities, including Rio Hato, David, Panama City, and Colon. Roughly 27,000 American servicemen, up to 200 aircraft, and about 300 vehicles participated in the operation. For the first time in combat conditions, stealth F-117A aircraft and attack helicopter 64A Apache attack helicopters were used. In fact, within the first 24 hours, American forces accomplished their main objectives by suppressing key centers of resistance. At the same time, the United States Department of Defense was working on mechanisms for coordinating psychological operations units with the mass media. A group of journalists and photo correspondents was formed in advance, and even before the start of hostilities, they were transported to predetermined locations through controlled media channels. They started creating the informational environment for the world, presenting events with a set interpretation. Elements of informational and psychological influence were also used against the Panamanian population and military personnel. One of the first strategically important sites captured by American troops was Panama's state television. Just an hour after taking control of the television studio, the emblem of the United States Department of Defense was broadcast on screens across the country, calling for an end to resistance. American units attempted to detain Panama's President Francisco Rodriguez and members of his cabinet, but the head of state managed to escape. At the same time, in violation of international law, the diplomatic missions of several countries, Cuba, Nicaragua, Peru, and Libya, were blocked. Continued. A car belonging to the Cuban embassy was stopped and searched. On December 22, United States Army Colonel Mike Snell told the press that a large amount of cocaine was found in a house owned by Manuel Noriega. But Noriega was not detained then. The American command feared that the remnants of the Panamanian armed forces would resort to guerrilla warfare, but these fears did not materialize. On December 25, the operation succeeded. The Panamanian government was overthrown, and Noriega went into hiding. Simultaneously, with the arrival of American troops in the country, Guillermo Endara, the candidate who had received the majority of votes in the last presidential election, whose results had previously been annulled by Noriega's regime, arrived at one of the United States military bases. Endara was sworn in and installed as the President of Panama, American-style democracy. For several days, Manuel Noriega took refuge in the Apostolic Nunciature, the Vatican's representation in Panama, requesting political asylum from Archbishop Joseph Briggy. American intelligence discovered Noriega's plan to seek asylum at the Vatican residence by intercepting and decoding messages sent through diplomatic channels. The irony was that the Vatican used encryption equipment from Crypto AG, a company owned by the CIA, which knew all the intricacies of its operation. American intelligence agencies managed to determine his location, after which the building was completely surrounded. Since storming the diplomatic mission was impossible, the American side resorted to unconventional methods of pressure to force Noriega to leave the nunciature. Powerful sound equipment was set up around the building, through which rock music was broadcast at maximum volume around the clock. This psychological tactic continued for several days. In the end, Noriega surrendered. He was evacuated by helicopter to the American Howard military base and then transferred to Miami, in the United States. Noriega stood trial on drug trafficking charges, and in 1992, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Taking into account his many years of cooperation with the CIA, his sentence was reduced to 30 years, and he served his time in one of the prisons in Florida. However, Noriega's suffering did not end there. In April 2010, the former leader of Panama was extradited to France, where he was accused of laundering money through French banking institutions. Things deteriorated further. In 2011, France transferred Noriega to Panamanian authorities. In 1995, he was sentenced in absentia to 20 years in prison for political murders. On May 29, 2017, Manuel Noriega passed away at the age of 83, right after taking office. The newly elected president of Panama, Guillermo Endara, launched a major campaign to remove Omar Torrijos, who was key in the Panama Canal's nationalization, from public memory. In a very short time, new school textbooks were published in the country, in which Torrijos and Noriega were portrayed solely as military dictators. Panama's international airport and the municipal stadium, which had previously been named after Torrijos, were renamed, and essentially, the names of Torrijos and Noriega began to be systematically removed from the official historical narrative. Later, Endara went further and announced the dissolution of the Panamanian armed forces as unnecessary. According to him, the country does not need to maintain its own army, since its security is ensured by so-called friends. By these friends, he primarily meant the United States and the American military, with whose direct support Endara came to power. According to official data, more than 500 Panamanian citizens were killed during the American invasion, and only 51 of them were military personnel. The United States lost 23 people, and the overall economic damage inflicted on Panama was estimated at about $1 billion. After hostilities ended, the United States government began investigating violations by American military personnel and civilians during the operation. The list of recorded offenses turned out to be quite extensive, ranging from looting and robbery of detainees to serious crimes against the life and health of civilians. A total of 21 criminal cases were initiated, 8 of which concerned the killings of civilians, a new reality. Today, the Panama Canal is officially recognized as the inalienable property of the Republic of Panama. It is managed by a government agency and, by law, cannot be transferred under the control of third parties. However, this issue remains unresolved. At the end of 2024, Donald Trump once again provoked a diplomatic conflict with Panama by declaring the United States' intention to regain control over the canal under the pretext of ensuring national security. The canal wasn't given up for anyone's gain, but as a gesture of cooperation with Panama. If the principles, both moral and legal, of this generous act of giving are not upheld, then we will demand that the Panama Canal be returned to us in full and without question. The Panama Canal handles about 1/6 of the world's trade, with the United States accounting for about 3/4 of all the cargo that passes through it. The main complaint from the current White House administration has been the high fees for American ships transiting the canal. American ships, both military and commercial, should be allowed to pass through the Panama and Suez canals free of charge. And if in the past such statements by Trump could be dismissed as just another of his many loud declarations that led to no consequences, now these words are being seen in a new light. In addition to financial claims, Trump expressed concern about the possible increase of China's influence in the Panama Canal region. In his opinion, Chinese military forces could be present in the canal zone. although Panamanian authorities have categorically denied these statements. Nevertheless, since the 1990s, the Hong Kong company Hutchison Holdings has controlled two strategically important port terminals, Balboa and Cristobal, located on both sides of the canal. This clearly reflects China's economic influence in Latin America. Panamanian authorities rejected the claims of the American president. President José Raúl Mulino emphasized Panama's sovereign right to the canal, and Foreign Minister Javier Martínez Acha Vázquez stated that there have been no negotiations with Trump on this issue and confirmed that the canal remains under Panama's exclusive control. However, the situation took an unexpected turn in February 2025, when Panama decided to grant American ships priority and free passage through the canal. In March, the consortium BlackRock and Terminal Investment Limited acquired control of Balboa and Cristobal, two major Panamanian ports, for nearly $23 billion. If approved, the consortium will receive about 90% of the controlling stake in the ports. In essence, BlackRock's acquisition of the ports is strategically significant in the global rivalry between the United States and China. China is financing large-scale projects under the Belt and Road Initiative, while through deals with major international companies like BlackRock, the United States seeks to expand its influence in key transportation and economic hubs around the world. There is one nuance. The port deal was supposed to be completed by the end of 2025, but it still hasn't happened. We recommend monitoring news about the Panamanian ports, as this could be the deciding factor. Recently, on December 29, 2025, Panamanian authorities demolished a monument honoring Chinese workers who helped build the Panama Canal. China demanded an investigation and the monument's restoration, stressing its historical importance. Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China. The forced demolition is a serious violation that deeply offends many Chinese people in Panama and harms China-Panama relations. The corresponding monument serves as evidence and a reminder of the significant historical contribution of Chinese workers to Panama. Today, Panama is called the Dubai of Latin America. Since 2008, the country's economy has grown by an average of 8% per year, and the fees for ships passing through the canal bring the treasury about $1 billion annually. The biggest concern for Panama is the project of a new canal in Nicaragua, and not just for Panama. Nicaragua is literally the backyard of the United States. Despite the fact that the United States and Nicaragua successfully trade with each other and cooperate in the fight against organized crime and in tourism, relations between these two countries are very tense. The key word, of course, is if, since it's hard to imagine America allowing such a Chinese threat in its own backyard. That's why the project has been frozen since before COVID, with no Chinese investments and little chance of implementation. Who knows what scandal might prompt the next decision by the states to intervene? Either way, unraveling a new historical tangle will be interesting. Thank you for watching, and see you in future episodes on our channel.